Detective Miles Thornton was feared in the courtroom, ruthless, connected, and untouchable. But when he tried to bury a case by intimidating the wrong woman, an unshakable public defender with secrets of her own, he set off a legal firestorm. Justice had a new advocate, and his badge couldn't protect him anymore. Detective Carl Maddox strutted into the downtown precinct like he owned the place because, in his mind, he did. His boots clicked across the tile floor, and junior officers instinctively cleared his path. He was a veteran, a name whispered. With reverence in the halls of law enforcement and contempt in the corridors of civil rights attorneys, he had a file full of commendations, a backlog of cleared cases, and an ego just as expansive. To Carl, the badge didn't represent justice. It was a shield, a license to do what he pleased, to bend rules when they got in the way of his version of the truth. And that morning, Carl needed a win. 2 nights prior, a high-profile jewelry store in Midtown had been cleaned out by a skilled thief. No alarms triggered, no signs of forced entry. The thief had been in and out in under 4 minutes, with over $200,000 in rare stones. Mayor Grady was on his 3rd term, and election season was nearing. That meant pressure. That meant answers. And Carl Maddox was the department's go-to fix-it man. He reviewed the footage again. Grainy black and white security tape, a masked figure moving with surgical precision. Gender was impossible to determine. No fingerprints, no blood, no mistakes. But a partial witness account from an elderly street vendor outside had been enough for Carl to construct a theory. The vendor swore they saw a woman walking briskly away, wearing a gray hoodie and carrying a red leather bag. "I swear on my life, officer," the man had said, voice shaking. She looked calm, real calm, like she knew exactly what she was doing. Carl had nodded, patted the man's shoulder, and taken the description down. By the time he was back at his desk, he'd already run facial recognition on traffic camera footage from the area. One hit stood out. Maya Reynolds, 34. No criminal record. Freelance writer. Resident of a modest apartment in Logan Heights. She'd passed the intersection for minutes after the heist occurred. That was enough. He ran her phone data. The record unconfirmed she had been in the vicinity. Never mind that thousands of people passed through Midtown that day. Carl zeroed in. Maya's presence, plus the vague description from the witness, made her a perfect suspect. Quiet? No. Priors? No power. No one who'd fight back. A pawn. And Carl needed a pawn. He found her working in a local bookstore the next afternoon, helping a teenage boy find a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Her hair was tied back, her glasses perched on her nose. She wore a gray cardigan, not a hoodie, looked as threatening as a librarian at closing time. Carl stepped into the shop with 3 uniformed officers. "Behind him, Maya Reynolds?" he asked, loud enough for the entire store to turn. She looked up, confused. "Yes, you're under arrest for suspicion of felony burglary and possession of stolen property." Her hands froze mid-page. The boy she was helping took a step, bag eyes wide. "I think you've made a mistake," she said calmly, standing. Carl didn't hesitate. He grabbed her wrist, yanked her arms behind her, and cuffed her. "No mistake," he growled. "We've got you on tape." As they escorted her out, she turned to the stunned customers and said softly, "Call Jeremy. Tell him it's happening." Again, Carl raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. The phrase tickled something in his memory, but he was too focused on optics. Cameras outside the shop caught the moment, a black woman in handcuffs, calm but defiant, being shoved into a squad car. Just the kind of show the department needed to appease a nervous public. At the station, Carl kept her in an interrogation room for 6 hours. No lawyer, no breaks. He asked the same questions repeatedly. Tried intimidation, tried misdirection. "You're clever," he said at one point, "but not clever enough to get past me." Maya simply smiled. "You think this is the first time? Someone like you has tried this." Carl slammed his fist on the table. "You think this is a game?" She leaned in, unflinching. "No, Detective Maddox. I think you've mistaken me for someone who's going to lie down." Carl stared at her, suddenly unsure of who had the upper hand. Eventually, she was booked and locked up overnight. The next morning, she appeared before Judge Fields, who was known for moving dockets along quickly. Carl watched from the back of the courtroom, arms crossed. "Maya Reynolds," the judge began, "you're being charged with felony burglary, grand larceny, and obstruction. The DA is offering a plea bargain, 6 months probation, no jail time. You plead guilty, and this ends today." Carl smirked. This was the part where they always folded. Maya stood, her wrists still cuffed, and looked the judge in the eye. "No." The judge blinked. "Excuse me?" I said, "No, Your Honor. I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do." Carl's smirk vanished. The courtroom murmured. The judge cleared his throat. "Very well. We'll proceed to trial." As Maya was let out, she turned just slightly, just enough for Carl to hear her whisper, "You should have checked who I was before you chose me." Carl didn't know what she meant. Not yet. 2 hours later, her court-appointed attorney filed a withdrawal. That same afternoon, Maya was visited in her holding cell by a woman dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue suit. Torres, a civil rights attorney with a record that sent shivers down the spines of crooked cops. She didn't work cheap, and she didn't work small cases, and she didn't say who sent her. That night, Carl sat in his office staring at his own report. He reread it 3 times, trying to reassure himself that the arrest was clean, the evidence solid, but doubts began to creep in. Who was Maya Reynolds? Really? The next morning, Internal Affairs sent a memo requesting a sealed file from a decade ago involving a botched corruption investigation into a joint task force. Carl once led that case had vanished mysteriously after the prosecutor stepped down, refusing to go public with her findings. Carl's stomach sank from her jail cell. Maya sat quietly watching the morning news play on the small television in the corner. Developing story, the anchor said. Detective Carl Maddox, whose arrest of Maya Reynolds made headlines yesterday, is now facing renewed scrutiny for past misconduct. More as this story develops. Maya smiled faintly and whispered to herself, "Checkmate." The courtroom brimmed with tension as Maya Reynolds walked in beside her new attorney, Alina Torres. The air around them shimmered with quiet defiance. Alina, sharp-eyed and calm, moved like someone used to shaking institutions. And Maya, longer in County Orange, but in a gray blazer and pressed slacks, carried herself like a woman who'd already calculated the outcome, because she had. Detective Carl Maddox, sitting at the prosecution's table, watched her with narrowed eyes. His jaw clenched as Maya nodded politely at the bailiff and took her seat. She wasn't afraid, she wasn't even pretending to be, and that unsettled him more than he could admit. He was used to fear. He counted on it, but what he saw in her eyes wasn't fear. It was strategy. Judge Fields called the court to order. Opening arguments began, and Carl sat back, confident the evidence would still hold. Alina Torres, though, opened with a line that silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you are about to witness is not a trial about a trial about power, misused, abused, and now finally challenged." Carl didn't flinch, but his grip on the table tightened. The prosecution laid out its case. Maya Reynolds, caught on camera near the scene of the crime, matched the description given by a witness. Her phone data placed her within 2 blocks. At the time of the heist, they referenced her red leather bag. They referenced the hoodie. It sounded convincing on paper. Then, Alina stood. "The prosecution's case is built on coincidence and conjecture," she said. "Let's start with the security footage." They wheeled in the TV monitor. The footage played grainy, nearly featureless. Alina pointed out that the figure in the video had a noticeably different build and gait than Maya. She'd brought in a forensic video analyst who explained that the height and stride of the person in the tape didn't match Maya's. Carl frowned. The expert's credentials were solid. Next. Alina dismantled the witness testimony. "You claim to have seen Ms. Reynolds carrying a red leather bag? Is that right?" she asked the elderly vendor. Double quotes. "Yes, I remember it clear." Alina pulled up a photograph from a different day, showing Maya carrying the same bag 2 hours after the crime. "Is this the bag you saw?" "Yes, that's it. This photo was taken by a traffic camera at 3:15 p.m. The robbery happened at 11:07 a.m. Maya was not in the area until well after the crime." The witness looked confused. The jury looked intrigued. Carl began shifting in his seat. Then came the metadata. Alina had subpoenaed Maya's phone provider legally, the right way. She presented time-stamped GPS data showing Maya was logged into a Wi-Fi network at a cafe 5 blocks away during the time of the crime. That data had somehow been missing from Carl's original report. Detective Maddox, Alina said on cross. "Why didn't your report include this?" Carl paused. "Because it didn't seem relevant." Alina raised an eyebrow. "You didn't think exculpatory data placing my client somewhere else was relevant?" Carl straightened. "It was inconclusive. Public Wi-Fi signals bleed through buildings," and yet Alina countered. "You used far more inconclusive data to justify her arrest, didn't you?" Objection. Sustained. But the damage was done. Each day of the trial peeled another layer off Carl's polished image. Alina introduced past complaints officially sealed, but leaked anonymously to her office. Complaints from suspects who claimed Carl altered reports, fabricated statements, and threatened witnesses. Most had gone nowhere. But now, under the weight of Maya's defense, they found fresh oxygen. The press had caught wind. "Hero, detective, or rogue cop?" read one headline. "Trial raises questions of systemic abuse." Carl's captain called him into his office. "You sure you got the right woman?" the captain asked. "She's playing games," Carl insisted. "Manipulating the system. She's got the system in a headlock," the captain replied. "Figure it out." Back in the courtroom, the defense's momentum grew. Carl noticed something else. Maya's questions. She never officially took the stand, but her role in her own defense was unmistakable. During sidebars, she whispered strategy to Alina. Evidence was introduced. Her gaze would drift up thoughtfully, analyzing its angle like someone who'd done this before. It wasn't until she passed him in the hallway that he got a hint of the truth. "Still proud of that task force you ran in 2014? She asked quietly. Carl froze. "What do you know about that?" She gave a small smile. "Enough." He remembered the scandal, an internal corruption probe, accusations of forged warrants, planted evidence. and a whistleblower whose case mysteriously disappeared before it went public. Carl had been at the center. The prosecutor had suddenly resigned, disappeared from public life, and the case was buried. What Carl didn't know was that Maya Reynolds had been that prosecutor only. She hadn't gone quietly. She'd changed her name, changed her life, and waited. And when she saw his name again, in her own arrest report, she decided it was time. Back in the courtroom, Alina requested that Carl take the stand. The DA objected, but the judge allowed it. Carl sat tall in the witness box, confident, trained, but Maya's eyes never left him. Elena's questions were clinical at first. Detective, how many arrests have you made in the past 5 years? Over 300 / how many resulted in convictions? Around 75%? And how many of those were plea deals? He paused. Most. Is it true you were named in an internal affairs investigation in 2014? That investigation was closed. Closed, Alina echoed. After the prosecutor resigned under unexplained circumstances, he stiffened. I'm not responsible for what prosecutors do. No, Elena said, but you are responsible for submitting accurate evidence. And now, here we are again. A case based on missing data, pressured witnesses, and conveniently absent footage. Carl snapped. She was there. I know she was. She fits the profile. And what profile is that? Alina asked sharply. Black, quiet, alone. The courtroom fell silent. Carl opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The judge called a recess. Outside the courthouse, Maya sat quietly on a bench while reporters swarmed the steps. She watched birds gathering on the fountain nearby, as if this were any normal day. Alina joined her. You ready for the next step? She asked. Maya nodded. He cracked, but we need to break him. Alina smirked. You still think like a prosecutor. I never stopped being one, Maya said. I just stopped playing their game. That night, someone leaked a voice memo to the press. It was a recording an officer confessing that Carl had pressured him to forge a statement for a past arrest. The officer had kept it, afraid to release it until now. The next morning, Maya entered the courthouse to a wall of cameras. Carl arrived to whisper gossip. He looked shaken, his collar loose, his posture uncertain. In the courtroom, Alina formally requested a dismissal of charges based on prosecutorial misconduct and lack of probable cause. The judge didn't immediately rule, but his expression said enough. Outside, Alina told the press, we believe this case reflects a pattern of abuse that deserves a full investigation. Not just for Maya but for every name in Detective Matt's file. That night, Carl sat alone in his apartment, television off, blinds drawn. He read an article titled, Former Prosecutor Returns from the Shadows to Fight Injustice Using Her Own Case as the Battlefield. There was her picture. There was the truth. Maya Reynolds was never the target. She was the reckoning. The courthouse was a furnace of noise, flashing cameras, and anxious whispers as the final week of the trial began. Inside, the air was tight, thick with anticipation. Everyone sensed the coming climax, the reckoning no one had dared believe would actually come. Maya Reynolds, once just another defendant in a sea of injustice, now stood at the center of a citywide storm. And Detective Carl Maddox's kingdom of silence was crumbling, brick by brick. The courtroom itself had transformed. Where once the seats were half empty, now journalists and legal observers filled every row. Law students took notes. Civil rights advocates leaned forward. Even police brass slipped quietly into the back, hoping to measure the scope of the fallout and their own exposure. Judge Fields took the bench and wasted no time. We will proceed with final witness testimonies and cross-examinations today. Closing arguments will follow. Carl Maddox sat rigid at the prosecution's table, hollow-eyed, stubbled, and pale. Gone was the smug detective with the coiled swagger. He was unraveling in public, like a sweater caught on a nail. His lawyer had advised him to remain composed. But as Alina Torres rose with the final blow, composure became an unreachable fantasy. Your Honor, she said, we'd like to call Officer Henry Diaz to the stand. A tall, nervous young officer walked up, glanced at Carl, then sat. His hands trembled slightly as he was sworn in. Officer Diaz, Alina began. You were part of Detective Maddox's team during the 2018 case against Marcus Lively, correct? Yes. You submitted a signed witness statement placing Mr. Lively at the scene of a robbery. Yes. Was that statement true? Silence. Then, a breathless, no, ma'am. A jolt went through the gallery. Carl's eyes widened. He tried to rise, but his attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. You're saying you falsified a statement? I was ordered to. By whom? Another pause. Detective Carl Maddox? Chaos rippled through the courtroom. The judge's gavel hammered for order. Reporters darted out the doors to phone their editors. Carl's mouth opened, but no words came. Maya, seated beside Alina, didn't move. Her face was unreadable, controlled, patient, powerful. Alina continued. And did you make a recording of that conversation, Officer Diaz? Yes. Is that the same recording played to the court yesterday? Yes. The judge called for a recess, but the damage had already metastasized. In the hallway, civil rights attorneys circled like hawks. Members of the Police Oversight Committee requested transcripts. the district attorney's office announced a separate review of Carl's entire arrest history. Carl didn't leave the courthouse that night. He sat in a quiet conference room with his attorney, silent, broken. She was nobody, he whispered. She wasn't supposed to matter, but she had. Because Maya Reynolds had once walked away from her job as a federal prosecutor to escape the system's rot. She'd watched evidence disappear, cases closed prematurely, and good officers punished for speaking out. She had tried to fix it from the inside until Carl Maddox shut down one of her major corruption cases. That was the beginning of her exile, until now. Now, she had power again, not because of her law degree or her courtroom skills, but because she dared to expose a man who believed his badge made him untouchable. The final day of the trial began with a new motion, Elena Torres asked, for all charges against Maya to be dismissed with prejudice, and moved for the court to consider a criminal referral against Detective Maddox for perjury and evidence tampering. Judge Fields didn't hesitate. This court finds there is no credible evidence against the defendant. All charges are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the court will formally request an investigation into misconduct by Detective Carl Maddox, with special emphasis on prior cases. Cheers erupted in the courtroom. Carl slumped in his chair. Maya didn't react, stood quietly as the bailiff removed the last set of cuffs from her wrists. She walked out of the courtroom like a woman walking out of prison. The crowd outside exploded in applause. Reporters thrust microphones toward her. Elena stood beside her. This is not just a win for Maya Reynolds, she said. It's a message to every corrupt official hiding behind their badge. Your time is up. When asked to speak, Maya held the microphone for a long moment. Then, I was never supposed to fight back. I was supposed to plead out, disappear, and be another nameless statistic. But I've spent too many years watching people like me get crushed. I didn't come back to punish one man, I came back to tear down everything he stood on. Her voice didn't tremble. Her words rolled like thunder. The fallout was swift. That afternoon the DA's office suspended Carl Maddox. Internal Affairs launched a sweeping investigation. Dozens of old cases were reopened. Carl's former partners were called to testify. Some turned, others went quiet. But one thing became clear. Carl hadn't just bent the law, he'd broken it repeatedly. And with impunity. Within a month, Carl was indicted on 4 counts of evidence tampering, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, and 1 count of perjury. When officers came to arrest him, he didn't resist. He had no more power to wield. His bejewels, his shield now hung like an anchor around his neck. In prison, Carl Maddox watched the news in his cell. He saw Maya Reynolds speaking before a packed audience at Howard Law School, standing beside lawmakers and activists. She was launching the Justice Rises Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to exposing police misconduct, helping victims of false arrest, and training attorneys to fight abuse from the inside. She's dangerous, he muttered. She's dangerous because she knows too much. But he said it to no one, because now no one listened to Carl Maddox. Meanwhile, Maya stood on stage in a crisp blazer, eyes sharp, voice unshakable. Behind her, a screen displayed statistics. Over 300 wrongfully charged individuals. Over 50 overturned convictions, all tied to Carl's cases. They tried to bury me, she told the crowd. What they didn't know was I was a seed. The applause was thunderous. The story of Detective Carl Maddox ended not with gunfire, not with glory, but with a courtroom and a woman he thought was ordinary. A woman he thought he could silence. But Maya Reynolds wasn't ordinary. She was the storm.